Welcome back, St. Louis. You are listening to the Freeman Bosley Jr. Show. Thank you for tuning in. So we've had the Boys and Girls Club. We had Precious Days Learning Academy. And so it's all about the youth, But we're going to switch gears a little bit. This morning, I have Miss Janine Wingo on the phone. Miss Janine Wingo is a registered nurse, a retired registered nurse. Graduated from nursing school back in 1976 from Maryville University. Right. Yes, Miss Wingo just celebrated back in December her 95th birthday. 95th birthday. And this lady is full of nothing but history. Got a chance to meet Miss Wingo because we worked together at one of the community colleges teaching nurse assistants so that we can just put more nurse assistants into the healthcare field. And that's how our paths crossed, and we just stuck together. We have been together ever since. And so that's been around since like 2012. So we got a chance to honor Miss Wingo through the Nurse Honor Guard St. Louis. And we went and did a live-in tribute right in her home. And it was a beautiful experience. And what the Nurse Honor Guard is basically an organization, for a nonprofit organization of nurses, registered nurses that honor nurses after they passed away. And they put on the traditional gear, the white with the cap and a blue cape. And we give them the Florence Nightingale lamp and a rose. And this is at the funeral service. But with Miss Wingo, we were able to give a live-in tribute. And it was such a beautiful experience. And so, Miss Wingo, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to the Freeman Bosley Jr. Show. And if you could just tell us about that experience.
Mom, they're asking you about your experience at the tribute.
I loved it. I was so surprised and thrilled with that tribute because how many nurses get a tribute like that? That was wonderful. Yes. And I thank every nurse that was there and every person who shared in that tribute. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And we thank you for serving. The number of patients that you have served in the ICU at St. Mary's Hospital and those other hospitals that you worked at, the number of patients you have served over the years. And then even after you retired, you went into the college and started teaching. And so that is phenomenal. Not only that, your daughters saw your walk, and you have two daughters that joined you in that experience in serving patients of Missouri. And so we thank you. We're honored to celebrate you. Honored.
She's talking about how much your work meant to her.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. I have two daughters who were nurses before I was. Mm-hmm. And I became a nurse because my husband became ill and I had no way of making a living. So I followed my daughters into their career, and I went to Maryville College and studied at night after working all day. And it was a wonderful experience for me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And so I had the story backwards. You followed your daughters. Okay. I love it. Miss Wingo, last year you called me and you said, Felicia, I want to come on the Freeman Bosley Jr. Show to tell people to save water. That was over a year ago. You said, I want to come on and talk to people about saving water. And I was like, okay. And, some believe that we didn't have a water shortage. However, there was a bill that was recently submitted by Senator Bean and another senator, Senate Bill 782, in reference to saving water. So if people want to transport water from out of the state of Missouri, then they have to get a permit if this bill passes. And so it was interesting to me, and I was telling your son Ken, who was on the phone with us this morning. Thank you, Ken, for joining us. Ken Bowman, we appreciate
You're
you,
welcome.
and for all that you do for your mom, and just phenomenal. Yourself and your wife and your daughter. We thank you. Caregivers are phenomenal. But Miss Wingo came and she said, I want to come on to the Freeman Bosley Jr. show to tell people to save water over a year ago. And some was like, oh, there's no water shortage. But I've read that it's about 1/3 of Missouri is what they have a drought, up to a severe drought. That prompted this bill to be written this year that you cannot transport water out of Missouri unless you get a permit. And although we have, the 3 rivers that mainly service Missouri, the concern is that Kansas and a few other of the western states are running out of problem. They have a crisis situation, and they don't want Missouri to be impacted by that. And so Ken and I was talking last week, and he was saying that his grandfather, had a way of using water. And Ken, I'll let you tell it. Using water for energy, or step in.
Well, my grandfather, Janine's father, he wanted to dam up Current River and create rural jobs, just like Bagnell Dam did for Lake the Ozarks. And he wanted to create good rural jobs, opportunity, energy for Southeast Missouri. That was what he lived for that. Mm-hmm. He dedicated his life in service to others, and he saw the value in protecting this resource that Missouri has a plentiful supply of because of our limestone geology. And he wanted to create jobs in a rural setting. And Mom and I have talked about how we could be successful with that same idea. What we're interested in is what's called micro hydro, small scale, manageable. The tributaries that feed those rivers you spoke of. Small scale. What Jimmy Carter talked about was recommissioning historic grist mills, and PURPA was the law that he enacted to make public utilities purchase that energy from independent producers. He wanted to create green energy jobs in the rural landscape. And then, of course, Reagan got in and pulled the solar panels off the White House. So here we are now, all these years later. But my mother and I see the value in taking that same idea, micro hydro, something manageable, and then using electrolysis, which is a 19th century invention to separate hydrogen from oxygen, water, separate the molecules, storable hydrogen. It's old technology, green energy in a rural landscape, but we also want to create a fishing lodge type of setting for independent and assisted living, so that we could have some kind of symbiotic relationship with these two interests and create rural jobs, which is what my grandfather was all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, would you be creating hydro generators for energy, or?
Well, basically what you do is you take this falling water energy that they used to use on a grist mill to grind corn.
Right.
And instead you create electricity.
Exactly.
And you could use that abundance of energy, that electricity, to do anything.
Right.
But the beauty of hydrogen, of using electrolysis to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen in water, you can store it. It's like bottling energy.
Okay.
And then when it is used, the only byproduct is steam. So it is the cleanest energy on the planet. We have an abundant source in Missouri. My grandfather saw that. He was instrumental in the REA. He was the chairman of the Ozark Border Cooperative. He electrified Southeast Missouri and dedicated his life to creating jobs in a rural setting.
It's interesting you mentioned that Carter had that purple bill. A lot of people don't know that Carter was an engineer by trade in the Navy, and I could see him coming up with that type of concept with his background.
He nuclear engineer, wasn't he?
Yeah, he don't get credit for this, but there was a nuclear plant that was going to explode and affect even America, and he was the only one that came up with an idea of how to keep it from happening. I won't go into details. You can research it yourself, but that's just some of the history of Jimmy Carter. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
A great man who does not get credit for the innovation. He was ahead of his time.
I got a question. Let's say, first of all, give your grandfather's name was George Parker Wingo.
PG, Parker George.
Parker George.
Parker George Wingo. Yeah,
Parker George Wingo. And it's interesting how your mom, Miss Wingo, shared with me how he was called to Elsnore to be the superintendent of the school. And when he got there, he was like, listen, this school needs some work. And he went down to talk to President Roosevelt to say, hey, I need some funding for the school. And then President Roosevelt was like, well, do you need money for electricity? Because at the time, there was no electricity in that area. So tell us a little bit about that story.
She's asking about when your father became school superintendent and the creation of the 12-year program, and also his work on the REA with Roosevelt's administration.
Well, we bought a house in Elsinore for $1,500. It was a beautiful 6-room house with 4 acres around it. And when he decided that he had to go talk to Roosevelt, he said, I have to mortgage this house. I don't have any money. So he mortgaged the house. He took one of his students with him to Washington. They talked to Roosevelt. They got money for streets. They got money for a new school. They needed it badly. And they needed new streets. And then they built a CCC camp, which is conservation camp, 1 mile out of Elsinore. And it was, we had a tower so that we could check on fires in the wooded areas around Elsinore. And then there were barracks for young men who had graduated from high school but had not gone on to college. And so they were training men. And let's see, what else?
And then he worked as the school superintendent. Didn't he donate his wages?
Yeah, he talked to James Farley in Washington, and Farley said, you can make more money as a postmaster, and I know you can pass the test. It's a civil service test at that time. So he said, well, can I become a postmaster and still go over to school and teach? And they said, yes, you can. You can't be superintendent, but you can go over to the school and teach. So he was not the superintendent that they called him from Springfield, but he did get to over to the school in the afternoon when the post office was quiet and teach a class.
Wow.
And I got to be the recipient of one of those classes. And let me tell you, he was a wonderful teacher. And let me tell you another little story. My son and daughter-in-law tried to have a baby for maybe 17 years. And somebody told me that there was a woman out in the country who wanted to give up her baby. And so I went out to talk to her, and I talked to the grandmother, and I said, I don't know if you remember me. She said, no, but your father was the best teacher I ever had. So he left a legacy that was wonderful in so many ways.
I became a father because of that story. Now tell them about your father's work with the Rural Electrification Project, the Ozark
Well,
Cooperative.
He got this idea when he went to Washington, and he came back and he started the REA, Rural Electrification Administration, there in Poplar Bluff. And he went to different cities around southeast Missouri, and he got other men to join the group. And they had meetings once a week. And I know this because I got to go with him down to Poplar Bluff, and I got to go to a movie while he was having a meeting. So he had these meetings, and I remember when the first light pole, and I don't know, that's not what you call it, but it was a fixture in Elsinore, a light pole went up. And
was that behind the post office?
Yes, it was behind the post office.
In the apartment your dad owned?
Yeah,
it was. And that was the first office of the REA?
No, the first office of the REA was all the way down Poplar Bluff. And it was, I don't remember what street it was, but it was beside a bowling alley. So I got to go bowling a lot.
But the pole was behind your dad's place.
Yeah, the pole was put up right behind the post office. Yes, it was.
All right. Well, Miss Wingo, we thank you this morning for allowing us to just get a little history in your life and what you shared. I know you and I talked about the attempt of the assassination on Roosevelt's life and how one of the mayors from Chicago ended up passing away. And so you just have so much history, and we thank you. We have to go ahead and end this segment, but Ken, I want to say thank you for sharing the information with us about the water supply, about Ozark Border Electric, and all that your family has contributed to not only Missouri but to the country. And so, Ms. Wingo, thank you again. Salute to you for being a registered nurse. May is the month that we celebrate all nurses, and we will be doing a big nurse tribute this month. So just thank you, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for honoring my mother.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, and there we have it. So that was some good information.
Yeah.
I tend to get on the phone with Miss Wingo and I take notes, notepads. Or if I go to her house, I take notes. I'm taking notes because there's so much information. So I had no idea about the assassination attempt on Roosevelt and how the mayor of Chicago at that time ended up taking that bullet and dying. And they said Roosevelt, he wasn't the president at the time. He was the president-elect. He was about to go into office, and he ended up going with them to the hospital. And of course, while he was there or whatever, visiting the guy who took his bullet. That's pretty deep. That's some, whew.
That's an interesting family because a lot of people don't know the youngest president in history was He was a Roosevelt. I think it was Ted Roosevelt.
We'll come back to that. We're going to take a quick break, guys. We thank you for tuning in to the Freeman Bosley Jr. Show.
History and science and everything.
Keep it on
wrapped
lock.
up into one.
Quit playing.
Oh!